don't know if anyone remembers, but back in 2016 there was this whole creepy clown craze that blew up in the US. It was all over the news, social media, everywhere. People would dress up like clowns and just stand around being creepy. At first, it was mostly pranks. You'd see videos of someone in a clown costume lurking near the woods or on the side of the road late at night. Sometimes they'd chase cars or try to scare people walking alone. It got out of hand fast, though. Some schools went into lockdown because people dressed as clowns were showing up near playgrounds. There were stories about clowns carrying weapons or luring kids into the woods. I think most of it was fake, just rumors that made it scarier, but still, who the hell thinks that's funny? Anyway, I never thought I'd get wrapped up in something like that. I wasn't a kid anymore and I lived in a pretty boring town where nothing ever happened. But man, was I wrong. It started around October, right before Halloween. I live in a small apartment complex just off the highway. It's not fancy, but it's affordable and the people there mostly keep to themselves. I work nights at a gas station, so my schedule's pretty weird. I'd come home around 3 or 4 in the morning, grab some food and crash. One night, I was walking back from my car after a shift when I noticed something at the edge of the parking lot. It was right where the lot ends and this small patch of wood starts. At first, I thought it was just some garbage or maybe a weird shadow, but then it moved. That's when I saw a clown. The guy was just standing there, about 50 feet away, wearing one of those old-school clown suits. His face was painted white with big red circles around his eyes and mouth. He had one of those curly rainbow wigs too. But the worst part? He wasn't doing anything. No waving, no laughing, no jumping out to scare me. Just standing there, staring. I froze. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was probably just some idiot trying to prank people. Maybe a teenager from the neighborhood. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of freaking out, so I hurried inside, locked the door, and didn't look back. For a couple of days, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it or that it was just a one-off thing. But then I saw him again. This time, it was closer to my building, right under one of the streetlights in the parking lot. I was walking out to my car and there he was, standing perfectly still. It was the same clown suit, same makeup, same creepy blank stare. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the cops? Tell the landlord? But what would I even say? Hey, there is a guy in a clown costume standing around my building? It didn't seem illegal, just really unsettling. I got in my car and drove off, trying not to look at him. Things started escalating after that. I'd see him almost every night, always in a different spot. Sometimes he'd be at the edge of the woods again, barely visible in the shadows. Other times he'd be standing by the mailboxes or near the dumpster. Once he was standing in front of my building's entrance. I waited in my car for what felt like forever until he finally walked off. I started to get paranoid. I'd check all the windows before leaving my apartment, looking for any sign of him. I even started carrying a small can of pepper spray just in case. Then, one night, I came home to find a balloon tied to my doorknob. It was one of those cheap red party balloons, but it made my stomach drop. I knew it was him. I yanked it off and threw it in the trash, but the message was clear. He knew which apartment was mine. I tried to tell myself it was just some elaborate prank, but it didn't feel funny anymore. It felt targeted. A few nights later, I was in bed when I heard something outside my window. My apartment's on the ground floor and my bedroom window faces the parking lot. I kept the blinds shut, but I could hear soft footsteps like someone was walking back and forth. I held my breath, listening. Then, I heard a quiet tap, tap, tap on the glass. I didn't move. I was too scared to even look. The tapping continued for what felt like forever before finally stopping. When I worked up the courage to peek through the blinds, no one was there. But in the morning, I found another red balloon tied to the side mirror of my car. I told my landlord about it, but he just shrugged it off. Probably just some kid messing around, he said. They'll get bored eventually. I even tried calling the police, but they weren't much help either. The officer I talked to sounded annoyed, like I was wasting his time. He said they couldn't do anything unless the guy actually tried to break in or hurt me. So I was on my own. The final straw came about a week later. I was leaving for work when I saw the clown again standing by the dumpster. I was sick of it by then, sick of feeling scared in my own home. "What do you want?" I yelled. He didn't say anything. He just tilted his head to the side like he was studying me. Then he slowly raised his hand and pointed at me. I didn't wait to find out what he was planning. I got in my car and sped off. I started looking into legal advice, trying to figure out what I could do. But without any concrete threats or evidence, my options were limited. Moving wasn't an option either. I couldn't afford a deposit on a new place, and breaking my lease would have cost me even more. So now I'm stuck here, living in a constant fear of when he'll show up again. If anyone has any advice, I'm all ears, because I don't know how much longer I can take this. I don't know if anyone remembers the killer clown craze from 2016, but it was a big deal back then. You'd see videos and stories all over the place. Clowns lurking by the side of the road, standing in people's yards late at night, chasing cars. Most people thought it was just some sick joke, and for a while, that's all it seemed to be. But not everything about it was harmless. Some of those clowns went too far. There were reports of them showing up near schools or carrying weapons. I didn't think it would ever affect me personally, but I was wrong. It happened on a regular school day. I was in high school back then, just a junior. It was October, and we were all hyped for Halloween. People were talking about costumes and parties. The clown thing was already in the news, but no one really thought much of it. It was like a meme or something to laugh about. That day started normal. I remember sitting in the back of my English class, half listening while our teacher droned on about symbolism in some book I didn't care about. My seat was next to the window, and I liked zoning out and watching the schoolyard when I got bored. That's when I saw the first clown. At first, I thought it was just some kid messing around. The clown was standing near the fence at the edge of the yard, right where the trees started. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring toward the school. He had one of those cheap clown masks with a big red smile and wild orange hair. I nudged the guy next to me and pointed out the window. "Hey, check this out," I whispered. He looked, squinted, and said, "Probably someone's dumb idea of a prank." Then he went back to his notebook like it wasn't a big deal. But I couldn't stop looking. The clown just stood there, not moving an inch. By lunchtime, there were more of them. When I went out to the yard with my friends, I saw 3 clowns now, all standing at different spots along the fence. None of them were doing anything, just watching. A few kids noticed them too, but everyone figured it was just a bunch of idiots trying to scare people. Some kids even laughed and yelled stuff at them. One of my friends joked, maybe it's the senior prank this year. But I don't know. Something about it didn't feel funny. Things got weird after lunch. I was back in my class, history this time, when the door to the classroom suddenly swung open. We all jumped and turned to look. A clown walked in. This wasn't like the ones outside. This one was holding a baseball bat, and he was laughing like a maniac. The sound sent chills down my spine. He was wearing a torn-up clown suit, and his mask was even scarier up close. It had jagged teeth painted on, and his eyes looked black and empty through the holes. For a second, no one moved. We were all frozen, staring at this guy like we couldn't believe what we were seeing. Then the teacher, Mr. Harris, stood up. Mr. Harris wasn't your average teacher. He was a big guy, used to live in a rough neighborhood, and he didn't put up with anyone's nonsense. He told us once that he used to be a boxer, and looking at him, you'd believe it. "Alright, buddy," Mr. Harris said, stepping between the clowns and the rest of us. "You've had your fun. Time to leave." The clown just kept laughing, swinging the bat in slow circles. It was like he didn't even hear Mr. Harris. Then, all of a sudden, the clown lunged forward. He didn't hit anyone, just swung the bat into the teacher's desk, shattering a pencil holder and scattering papers everywhere. That's when we all started screaming. Mr. Harris didn't flinch. He grabbed the nearest chair and used it to block the clown's next swing. Then he pushed the guy back toward the door, shouting for us to stay put. We scrambled to the back of the room, trying to stay out of the way. A few kids opened the windows like they were thinking about climbing out, but Mr. Harris yelled, "Stay put." Somehow, he managed to shove the clown out into the hallway and slammed the door shut. He locked it and leaned against it, breathing hard. "Everyone stay calm," he said, though he didn't look calm at all. "I'm calling the office." That's when the alarms went off. We could hear the principal's voice over the intercom telling everyone that the school was going into lockdown. "Teachers, secure your classrooms," he said. "Students, remain in place." We could hear shouting and footsteps in the hall. Someone outside banged on our door, but Mr. Harris didn't let them in. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, just sitting on the floor, trying to stay quiet. When the cops finally showed up, the clowns were gone. The officers searched the school and found signs of a struggle in a few other classrooms. Desks overturned, broken glass, even some blood. No one was seriously hurt, but a couple of kids had minor injuries. The clowns must have taken off when they heard the lockdown announcement. No one knew who they were or what they wanted. They didn't steal anything or make any demands. It was like they just wanted to cause chaos. I don't think I'll ever forget that day. It's been years, but I still get nervous when I see someone in a clown costume. And honestly, it's not just about the clowns. It's about how something like that could happen in the first place. The world's a scary place sometimes. People do things that don't make any sense just because they can. And the worst part is, there's no way to stop it until it's already too late. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know one thing. We can't just laugh this stuff off. If you don't take it seriously, it's only going to get worse. Okay, so let me start by saying I've hated clowns since I was a kid. Like I really hated them. It all started when my parents took me to the circus when I was around 6 or 7. I don't know what they were thinking because I was already freaked out by clowns, but they thought I'd get over it if I saw them in person. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. There was this one clown at the circus who made everything worse. He wasn't like the happy, funny clowns you see on TV. This guy was tall, had this creepy face paint with a sharp smile and moved in this jerky, unnatural way. At one point during the show, he stopped in front of me, stared for way too long, and then tilted his head like he was studying me. It freaked me out so bad I screamed and cried until my parents had to take me out of the tent. Since then, I can't even look at clowns without feeling the same panic. Halloween is the worst time of the year for me because there's always someone dressed up like a clown. Usually, I just stay at home, turn off the lights and pretend I'm not there. But this one Halloween was different, and it's something I'll never forget. It was October 31st, 2016. During that creepy clown craze you probably heard about. People were dressing up as clowns and scaring the crap out of others for fun. Some of them were harmless pranks, but there were also stories about clowns attacking people or chasing them with weapons. The whole thing made my phobia so much worse. That night I was home alone. I live in a small house in a quiet neighborhood. It's not fancy, but it's mine. I didn't want to go out or deal with trick-or-treaters, so I turned off all the lights and put on some noise-cancelling headphones to binge-watch a show. Everything was fine until around 8:30 p.m. when I heard a loud knock at the door. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just kids looking for candy. But then the knocking came again, louder this time, like whoever was out there wanted to make sure I knew they weren't leaving. I sighed, got up, and peeked through the peephole. My stomach dropped. It was a clown, and not a cute, kid-friendly one either. He was tall, way too tall to be a kid, and wearing this filthy red and white suit. His mask was terrifying, with sharp, exaggerated features and a blood-red smile that stretched across his face. He was holding a huge bag, like a duffel bag or something, slung over his shoulder. I froze, heart pounding. This wasn't a little kid looking for candy. The clown just stood there for a moment, then lifted his free hand and waved slowly, like he knew I was watching. I couldn't move. Finally, I snapped out of it and locked the door even though it was already locked. I shouted through the door, "Go away, I don't have candy." There was silence for a moment, and I thought maybe he'd left. But then I heard a loud thump. I looked through the peephole again and saw him gesturing wildly like he was throwing some kind of tantrum. He pointed at his bag, then at the door like he was demanding I give him something. "No," I shouted again, trying to sound brave even though I was shaking. "Go somewhere else." After what felt like forever, he finally walked away. I watched him disappear down the street and I thought that was the end of it. A few hours later, I was asleep when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I shot up in bed, my heart racing. It sounded like it came from the living room. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but then I remembered the clown. My stomach turned and I grabbed my phone. I called 911 and whispered to the operator that someone had broken into my house. She told me to stay on the line and find somewhere safe to hide. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and locked myself in the bathroom. I could hear someone moving around in the house. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Then I heard a loud bang on the bathroom door. I nearly dropped the phone. The clown was outside the bathroom, pounding on the door with something heavy. The sound echoed through the small space, making my ears ring. He didn't say anything, just kept pounding harder and harder. The door shook with each hit, and I could hear the wood starting to crack. The 911 operator was still on the line, telling me to stay calm and that the police were on their way. But I wasn't calm. I was hysterically crying and begging for them to hurry. The clown started laughing. It was this low, guttural sound, like he was enjoying this. Then I heard him start to stomp on the door, kicking it with so much force I thought it would break any second. Just when I thought it was over, I heard sirens. The clown must have heard them too, because he let out this furious scream and pounded on the door one last time before everything went quiet. I stayed in the bathroom, clutching the bat until I heard voices yelling, "Police, come out with your hands up." I opened the door just a crack and saw the clown standing in the hallway facing the front door. The police were shouting at him, telling him to drop the bag, but he didn't. Instead, he took a step toward them. That's when I heard the gunshots. It was over in seconds. The police told me to stay where I was while they cleared the house. I sat on the bathroom floor, shaking and crying until an officer came to check on me. They found the clown's bag in the hallway. Inside, there was a rope, a hammer, rusty nails, and several knives. I don't know what he was planning to do, but I'm glad I didn't find out. The police never figured out who he was or why he targeted me. They said he didn't have any ID and his fingerprints didn't match anything in their system. That night still haunts me. I moved out of that house a few months later, but I still have nightmares about the clown. Every Halloween I make sure I'm never alone. If there is one thing I've learned, it's that some people just want to hurt others for no apparent reason. And sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters, they're people. Let me just say, Halloween has always been my favorite time of year. I love the costumes, the parties, and the overall vibe. But after what happened last year, I don't think I'll ever look at a Halloween the same again. It all started after a house party me and my best friend Amanda went to. She's blonde, loud, and fearless, the type who'll call people out for cutting in line at Starbucks. Me? I'm the quieter one, the one who usually plays peacekeeper when Amanda's big personality starts rubbing people the wrong way. Anyway, the party was great, but by the time we left, it was close to 1 AM and we were starving. Most places were closed except for this little 24-hour deli down the street. It's one of those places that has a couple of plastic tables inside and the faint smell of stale coffee and grease. Not fancy, but it was our only option. We walked in, ordered a couple of sandwiches, and sat down at one of the tables to wait. That's when things started getting weird. The deli was practically empty, except for the guy behind the counter, who looked half asleep. We were scrolling on our phones and talking about the part when the door opened and someone walked in. I glanced up and immediately felt my stomach twist. It was a clown. Now, normally I would have thought it was just some guy in Halloween costume, but this wasn't like the fun, goofy kind of clown. His makeup was smeared and his clothes looked grimy, like he'd been wearing the same costume for days. He had this big, exaggerated grin painted on his face, but his actual expression was blank, like he wasn't really there. He didn't go to the counter to order food. Instead, he walked over and sat down at the table directly across from us. Amanda didn't seem to notice at first, but I couldn't stop staring. The clown didn't say anything. He just sat there looking at us. No, not at us. It was more like he was staring through us, his eyes locked on mine. I whispered to Amanda, "Do you see this guy?" She looked up and her face immediately changed. "What the hell?" she said, loud enough for the guy behind the counter to glance over. The clown didn't react. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and a pen, and started drawing. His movements were fast and jerky, like he was trying to scribble something as quickly as possible. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was so focused, his head bent over the paper, his hands moving furiously. Amanda, being Amanda, didn't let it slide. "Hey," she said, leaning forward. "What's your deal, man? You're creeping my friend out." The clown stopped drawing and looked up at her. His face didn't change, he just stared at her unblinkingly, like he was trying to memorize every detail of her face. "Seriously," Amanda said, her voice getting louder. "Go on, bother someone else." The guy behind the counter finally stepped in. He came around and said, "Hey buddy, you can't just sit there bothering people. You need to leave." The clown didn't say a word. He just folded the paper he'd been drawing on, stood up slowly, and walked out. I thought that was the end of it, but a few seconds later we heard loud crashes coming from outside. Amanda and I ran to the window and saw the clown throwing chairs and trashing the outdoor tables. He kicked over a trash can and started ripping open the bags inside, scattering garbage everywhere. The guy behind the counter stepped out and yelled at him, but the clown just stood there, breathing heavily, his shoulders rising and falling like he was ready to explode. We decided it was time to leave. We grabbed our sandwiches and hurried out the back door, cutting through the alley to avoid him. My heart was pounding the whole time. When we got to Amanda's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the clown following us, but the streets was empty. "God, what a freak," Amanda said, starting the car. "Probably just some loser looking for attention." I nodded, but something about the way he stared at us, the intensity of it, felt off. The real horror came the next morning. Amanda texted me saying she found something taped to her car when she went out to grab coffee. It was the piece of paper the clown had been drawing on. She sent me a picture of it and I felt sick. The drawing was childlike, almost cartoonish, but it was unmistakable. It was me, with my red hair, surrounded by crudely drawn hearts. Next to me was a drawing of Amanda, but she wasn't surrounded by hearts. She was lying on the ground, her body twisted with red scribbles all around her, like blood. I didn't know what to say. Amanda called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. They said it was probably just a Halloween prank, but I could tell the officer didn't really believe that. He kept glancing at the drawing, his jaw tight. The deli's security cameras caught the clown trashing the place, but he didn't get a clear shot of his face. He'd already disappeared by the time the police showed up. Amanda was furious, but I was terrified. Whoever this guy was, he knew what we looked like, and he knew Amanda's car. It's been a year since that night, and we haven't seen the clown again. But every Halloween I can't help but feel the same fear, like he's still out there, waiting. I keep the drawing in a locked drawer, a reminder of how quickly a fun night can turn into something straight out of a nightmare.